Hello and welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Cram session. I'm Liz Loza. We've got Andy Behrens and Matt Harmon. And I don't know if you guys have checked in on 2020, but understatement of the year, lots of stuff going on, right? Fantasy football definitely not top of mind for anyone. Heck, my soon-to-be homeschooled first grader might come running through this door with nothing but a pair of Pokemon underwear on his head. So, just forewarning y'all. So I have to ask you guys, when you're, thinking and talking about your home leagues, not just these expert leagues that we all play in, but have you felt, especially because of the absence of a regular preseason, normal preseason, like a dragging of the feet to get something going, to set a draft date? Any general emotions coming up for either of you, Andy?
Yeah, I have a home league that just came together last night, and the commissioner seemed surprised that football was happening and happening relatively soon, right? Some of this is just the sports calendar. Like, baseball started a month ago, and the NBA playoffs are in the first round right now. So, it should be May. It should be late April or May. That's when those things happen. We've had no preseason football. So yeah, it's snuck up on people, but I think we're slowly creeping in and it's going to launch.
Matt, are any of your leagues talking about how they're going to accommodate the challenges that this particular year is presenting? I
feel like a lot of people really are, like Andy said, just kind of coming around to oh, this thing is really going to happen, and I feel like that sort of to a degree too. Oh man, this thing is, it's in a couple weeks. This is, and it feels so weird, right? Because like Andy said, other sports are mixing in when they're really not supposed to. There's no preseason games. We're not getting all excited about, an 8-yard Darwin Thompson run or something like that. Your internal clock is all off. Usually the text I'm getting in, mid-July or something, I'm starting to get now. So I think it's going to be much like how the NFL has had to sort of ram this thing through in terms of training camp and everything. Let's speed it up. Let's get the installs in quickly. Let's go to live tackling and then jump right into games totally unprepared. I feel like a lot of fantasy managers are going to be doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's hard enough to keep track of the days as it is. It's another thing to ask to keep track of the sports calendar. So my home leagues have been very much the same as yours. So everyone listening to this, you are not alone if all of a sudden, to use Andy's words, you feel like the season has snuck up on you, because it has for everybody. We know you've been understandably distracted. And if you're trying to figure out what to do in your fantasy draft, then we are here for you. This next hour is, in fact, custom tailored for you. Here's the idea for today. I want you to think of it as like a fantasy cram session. We've got about 60 minutes, and we're going to try to pack in as much advice as we can into that time. So here's what we're going to talk about. What to do in your first round. Some players we really love at their current ADPs. Some players whose values we really don't dig. Some guys to target at the end of draft. I'm going to talk to Dr. Alex Weber, who's the team physician for the USC Trojans and the LA Kings. He's going to give us some injury insights ahead of this crazy, unprecedented season. And then we're going to close things out with some final strategies and predictions. All right, guys, start the clock. Let's get going. Let's cram. First round, what do? Your first pick sets the tone for your whole draft. It's the pick you definitely want to nail. So let's quickly read through the first 20 players coming off the board in Yahoo drafts. Obviously, number 1, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry. No surprise, first 5 are all running backs. Then things shift a little bit. You've got Michael Thomas at number 6, followed by Dalvin Cook. Oh, number 8, Patrick Mahomes, the first quarterback being selected. Heading back to the running back position with Joe Mixon, then Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Nick Chubb, Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, Lamar Jackson, Kenyon Drake, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, our first rookie at the 17 spot, Aaron Jones, Miles Sanders. Those are our first 20 players. Now, does anyone here, Matt, I'll start with you, just simply not belong? Or one of these guys, like someone that you're like, how did this creep in? How did this player creep into the top 20?
No, honestly, I feel like that's a pretty good group here. The only thing I would say is, I have George Kittle ahead of Travis Kelce as my top tight end. We've got Kelce at 18th overall. If you're taking a tight end in that second round range, which I think is totally cool to do this year, I think Kittle's got just absolutely monstrous upside. We've been asking the question, which wide receiver benefits, from this Deebo Samuel injury early, and then like every other 49ers receiver has gotten hurt since. I feel like the answer might just be more George Kittle. I think he could be up for just like a historic season this year. So that would be the only thing I have. And, of course, obviously it's, do you really want to spend an early round pick on a quarterback? We have 2 in the top 20. It's not my move, but I think these 2 guys are as good a bets as any if you're going to take someone in that range.
Love the Kittle talk, by the way. Same. Going to talk about that a little bit later in strategy. Also, Emmanuel Sanders no longer there. So that's another body, another group of targets that have been vacated. Andy, do you have any issues with any of these 20 players, or does everything look pretty okay to you?
First of all, I think it's pretty amazing that we have 4 Chiefs going in the first 18 picks. I can't remember many situations. There might have been a year where we were taking Chris Carter, Randy Moss, Robert Smith, and Randall Cunningham in the first 2 rounds. Like, this almost never happens. Like, some of the best offenses of the last 30 years have given us 3 first and second round picks, but 4 is, and they all belong. Like, they totally all belong. I could move up Clyde Edwards-Helaire 10 spots and feel pretty good about it. And I think that's probably, I think what you're seeing right now is like a snapshot in time. And what is probably happening right now, if you're drafting, is Edwards-Helaire is going to go, if not first half of the first round, middle of the first round where he should be.
Yeah, as more and more drafts start to set their times and more mocks are taken, obviously this ADP is going to shift. And I think you're absolutely right. Let's start, I mentioned that the first 5 players are all running backs. Every year we talk about the running back position being volatile and thin and, petering out rather quickly. Where in the first round specifically do you start to consider taking a wide receiver over a running back? I will say for myself, I don't mind taking a wide receiver ahead of Derrick Henry. To me, Derrick Henry is, I think you're drafting him at peak value right there. You're expecting him to do exactly what he did last year, which is a tough ask. But again, if anyone has proven to be a statistical anomaly, it is Derrick Henry. So I understand why one would feel compelled to take him at the 5 spot. I'm okay differentiating about there, though. Andy, what about you?
Yeah, if it's a full PPR format, and that's not Yahoo default. Yahoo default is half PPR. If it's a full PPR format, I'm pretty interested in Michael Thomas at 4. That is where I have generally taken him. The gap between Michael Thomas and the number 2 fantasy receiver in full PPR last year was 98 points. Like, it's a crazy gap. And obviously that's a historic record-setting season. But the year before, which is maybe more likely for Michael Thomas this year, was still 125 catches and 1,400 yards. Like, he's pretty solid in a PPR format. I'll just say that. And then in half PPR, I'm with you. I would still have Thomas over Derrick Henry. Henry basically has to score 16 or 18 touchdowns in a half PPR format in order to justify that sort of draft position. Because, I mean, we can do a little wish casting and hope that Derrick Henry someday is going to catch 40 passes because things go well when they throw screen passes to him, right? But it just hasn't happened to this point. So I'm not gonna bank on that and price it in.
Yeah, just to throw some more Derrick Henry talk in here too. Over the last 4 years, the fantasy running back 8 in PPR formats has averaged just over 251 points per season. That's already 3 spots below Henry's ADP that we're talking about here as the running back 5, and just 11 running backs out of the 301 to have cleared 250 points since the merger have recorded fewer than 20 catches, which obviously Henry did last year. So, I mean, you are really banking on an insane outlier. I kind of do tend to think that he can get to maybe the 35 range this year, only because number one, I think the Titans are going to be throwing it more because they're not going to be just these, absolute great game scripts for running the ball. Dion Lewis, as much as Dion Lewis is, really not a factor in any of our minds anymore, he is out of the picture. Darrington Evans is kind of just, he's picking it up slow in camp so far. So, we're never going to see Henry be a featured pass catcher, but I feel comfortable enough to take him at 5 over a wide receiver like Michael Thomas, or I have Devontae Adams as my top receiver. So then I think you're starting to think of those 2 receivers over, my running back 6, which is Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Dalvin Cook or any of these other guys after that.
Matt, I want to stick with you because we're going to talk about those players who are burdened, if you will, with the first overall pick. As our quasi-resident Panthers fan, what are your expectations for Christian McCaffrey in a new offense with a new quarterback and a new head coach?
Well, 2 things there. Liz, you actually did a really good podcast recently, and your guest highlighted that, they were, I think you might be able to talk about it more than I could, but highlighted that, the number one running back overall has never repeated, in multiple seasons the last decade, something like that, I think it was. So, I mean, the odds are very good. Last year coming into the season, I think Saquon Barkley went number one overall in 75% of Yahoo drafts. And this will be even more consensus of the top guy going first overall in this year's draft. So the odds are pretty good that, McCaffrey finishes this running back 3, running back 4, running back 5. And also, we talk about continuity so much. You mentioned it. There's no team that has worse continuity this year than the Carolina Panthers. They have a new starting quarterback, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, and new defensive coordinator. I believe they're the only NFL team that boasts that much transition from last year to this year. So at the end of the day, though, there's really no, other than just he's not going to probably be the top scoring running back again. There's probably, a lot of transition in the offense. There's really no holes that you can poke in McCaffrey's outlook. I mean, he's been an absolute workhorse the last 2 years. I think this offense is going to throw the ball a ton. I think they're going to play really fast. I wouldn't be surprised if Teddy Bridgewater, if he plays a 16-game season, leads the NFL in pass attempts. And the Panthers were already pass heavy last year too. So there's really no holes you can poke in McCaffrey's outlook. It's just you have to realize, maybe don't cry yourself to sleep in a few months from now if he finishes as the running back 3, because that's just kind of what tends to happen.
Right. It was Mauricio Gutierrez of Estadio Fantasy that came on the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast a couple of weeks ago and noted that stat that I believe and you included it in your running back tiers article, which everyone should definitely check out on the website, that over the past decade, only 2 running backs have managed to, only 2 RB1s from fantasy purposes managed to finish within the top 5 in, again, the second season. So I also want to add that our very own Scott Pianowski has fearlessly forecasted Christian McCaffrey for 103 catches, 2,044 total yards, and 13 touchdowns. That's about 350 yards and 6 touchdowns, fewer than he posted in 2019. It's going to be interesting because, Matt, I think when you're talking about these Panthers throwing a lot more, you're alluding obviously to the ultra green defense and the need for them to make up for that deficiency, but also accounting for the addition of Robbie Anderson. It makes things a little bit murkier.
This defense looks horrible on paper.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not pull any punches. Honestly, I feel like I got a pretty good grasp on a lot of NFL players. I feel like I got a pretty good grasp on a lot of these rosters because it's my job. And I mean, the Panthers, especially, like you mentioned, I've got some sort of weird attachment to that team. Yikes! I don't know who a lot of these goofballs are back there. So I mean, it's going to be quite a messy year from a defensive perspective. I don't think they're going to be in a lot of positive game scripts. And they do have the weapons. I think they've got the guys on offense to be a pass-leaning team, and I think that's the strength of their team. So, yeah, I think they're just going to be pushing the ball a lot because not only do they need to, I think they also kind of want to as well.
Andy, switching to you as the only analyst in the game to successfully predict Lamar Jackson's QB1 season last year. Here's the question for you. Is there a real case for any quarterback to go in the first round ever, even Mahomes and the aforementioned Jackson?
Yeah, I can tell you that historically, it has always been a bad idea. Historically, we can come up with reasons why this should happen. People have made the case for Michael Vick. They've made the case for Andrew Luck. They've made the case for Peyton Manning. I remember a case for Cordell Stewart, for Dante Culpepper, right? These things have happened throughout time, and it never works out. It didn't work out for Brady when he was coming off the greatest quarterbacking season in history. I will say, in the case of Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, we have a guy who put up the highest scoring season total in quarterbacking history, right, for fantasy purposes. And then in Lamar Jackson, the highest per game average that anybody has ever put up. In fact, Jackson last year, the per game scoring difference between him and the number 2 quarterback was greater than the per game scoring difference between the number 2 and the number 24 quarterback. So it was a huge, massive, stupid positional edge to own Lamar Jackson last year. That said, is he actually going to back that up? Are all those passing touchdowns going to be there? Maybe it doesn't matter. If he's running for 1,200 yards, maybe it doesn't matter. A little part of me believes that Lamar Jackson is just a different sort of iteration of the quarterback position. and it can happen again. Maybe not almost 30 fantasy points per game, but something like 24, 25. And yeah, that would justify an early pick. Like, I don't blink when somebody takes either Mahomes, who's the best quarterback in the game today, or Lamar Jackson in the first couple rounds. But again, like, historically, it hasn't worked out well. And the whole idea is to find that next Lamar Jackson. I don't know that there's going to be a next Lamar Jackson. I don't know that anybody in the game beyond him or Mahomes can put up those kind of numbers. But the idea is to find the value, the guy that you can take as like the QB8, QB10, who produces a top 3 finish.
So then who is that person for you? Who do you find yourself drafting when you are waiting on the position?
Yeah, if it's anyone, it's Kyler Murray, right? Like, I feel Kyler Murray, although...
Then you're not waiting that long then. Then you're not waiting.
Yeah, that's the thing. We've built some of that into his draft cost, because he goes off the board as like the QB5, the QB6. Mm-hmm. But he is several rounds after Lamar Jackson. If somebody in your hometown league is taking Lamar Jackson or Mahomes at the end of round 1, early in round 2, which is about where they go, you are at least going to be able to get Kyler Murray in like round 5, round 6.
Josh Allen. Just take Josh Allen, Andy.
Oh no. This is a terrible response. We either need to edit this out or we need to squash this right now. Josh Allen's so bad. I get it. I get it with Josh Allen. I get it with the rushing yards. What an abysmal college quarterback who has been a brutal passer. It's a great situation in terms of the receiving core. Love that. I got my issues with Josh Allen though, because so far to this point in his NFL career, if he doesn't run for a touchdown, he can't help you. He's never thrown for 270 yards in a game. It drives me. I have issues with Josh Allen. I have to rank him inside the top 10, right? Because he's gonna run for 6, 7, 8 touchdowns.
Just talk to me when he's QB3 this year, Andy. I'll talk to you in the winter.
Oh no, I'm ill.
Some Nick Chubb truthers, fans, are feeling a little bit peaked themselves, considering that Kareem Hunt's role and at least like the hype around him continues to build, right? There's been some beat reporters who have said that both Chubb and Hunt will receive 15 carries apiece. That starts to limit Chubb's upside and adds to Hunt's upside. I wrote an all upside team article, and Kareem Hunt was the flex on that article. I don't know how you can't love him where he at least was going. Again, now that ADP has started to climb. What's your take on this backfield in Cleveland? Understanding, of course, that Kevin Stefanski, a Kubiak acolyte, will be focusing more on the run in a league that remains very much a passing league.
Well, I think Nick Chubb is about as good as it gets as a runner, right? Like I think he's absolutely top tier. The concern, obviously, is that as soon as Kareem Hunt entered the picture last year, that guy took all the receptions out of the backfield, right? Nick Chubb caught, I think it was 11 balls in the second half of the season after Kareem Hunt returned. And if it looks anything like that this year, and again, new coaching staff and some grown-ups on the coaching staff, like we have every reason to think that this is going to be like a more legit coaching staff with actual like sensible plays called near the goal line. That should be fun. But if it looks anything at all like last year, Kareem Hunt took a lot of those receptions. I still think Nick Chubb near the goal line should be a dominant player and can win a rushing title still. Like, I'm going to be surprised if it's anything close to a 50-50 split, because I think there is a real edge for Nick Chubb in terms of the ability to just run the football. Like, it's him and it's Saquon and it's not many other guys that I would put in that upper tier of just pure early down runners.
I agree with his talent, but he was, and you can't deny the facts, when in week 10 Hunt was added, he was just less effective in the red area of the field. And that was, he wasn't nearly as efficient. I mean, he received more red zone totes, an average of 3.25 per game, but he only converted 2 scores. Hunt managed more touchdowns. Admittedly, you're right, the receiving work certainly helped him out in that regard, but are we willing to say, well, it was the end of the year and it was a very long year for the Browns? And Andy, I know that you always say, and I have adopted this as my own motto, talent is the tiebreaker. And so Chubb should remain a, end of the first round, early second round pick, depending on how players are falling in drafts.
Yeah, I'm not taking him at the end of the first round, and have not been. Like, if he's fallen to me in the middle of the second round, that's the point at which I'm like, well, okay, I'm dealing with some second and third tier backs, and again, the upside I think for Chubb is always going to be a rushing title. I think that's definitely in play for him, but Hunt is just a huge factor. I mean, he's a gifted receiving back who I think if you prorate his season last year, it's about 70 catches, and that's workload that is clearly not going to Nick Chubb if both are healthy.
So we're talking about these players and we're talking about their ADPs, but I want to skew positive a little bit. I want to talk about players we really like at their current ADP. Andy, I'm going to start with you. Talk to me about a particular running back going in the 4th round.
Yeah, listen, I get Mark Ingram everywhere. I feel like there's the J.K. Dobbins factor has just been built into his average draft position, right? Like, we're all expecting big things from Dobbins. He's a wonderful collegiate player, a 2,000-yard back. Great. He's the future of the running back position for Baltimore. Listen, Mark Ingram scored 15 touchdowns last year. He averaged 5 yards per carry. And when something works spectacularly well for a team, not just like pretty well, but when something works spectacularly well for a team, I just never expect them to veer away from it. So, Ingram is on the wrong side of 30. There's a lot to worry about long term, but in 2020, Mark Ingram is still going to be the guy. The other thing about Ingram last year is that he could have done more, except Baltimore just kept blowing people out. They kept rolling up 40-point halves, and then Mark Ingram would sit. Like, there is definitely a path for Mark Ingram to again give us double-digit touchdowns, incredible efficiency. The Ravens ran the ball like 100 more times than any team in the NFL. So there's plenty of volume here, even when they get Dobbins involved. Ingram was a top 8 fantasy back last year, and he can do the same this season.
It's interesting, Matt, because Andy is talking about a player that worked out spectacularly well, to quote, last year. So why move away from him? And yet you're going to talk about a player who has done nothing spectacular except suck. And no one wants to move away from him.
I mean, Liz, come on. This is your guy, Ronald Jones. And, to be fair, he was all right last year. You know, when you look at the totality of the picture, over 30
Matt,
catches,
hold on.
700 yards.
I am going to quote you. Bruce Arians came out of retirement to start Peyton Barber?
Yeah, right. I get it. I mean, look, it wasn't the smoothest sailing ride, but I'm going to say he hasn't been hideous so far as an NFL player. But look, the deal with Ronald Jones this year is you don't even have to be one of the Rojo fan club members like you are, Liz, to really like the player, because his ADP is so attractive right now. And that's what I really like about this guy, because look, here's the deal. I think we can decide whether you really think the Bucs are going to be some elite offense under Tom Brady, but they're probably going to be at least a top 15 unit, right? I mean, with these receivers, with Bruce Arians and Byron Leftwich calling the show, I think this is going to be a productive offense, and you can really get the starting back for this offense. And I do expect Ronald Jones to be the clear starting back, because Keyshawn Vaughn is completely kind of fallen out of the picture here, because, he's starting slow. He's a rookie that was on the COVID list for a while. That's not to be, it's not unexpected. I don't think LeSean McCoy is a gigantic threat, and they haven't been talking about LeSean McCoy as if he's a gigantic threat to Ronald Jones's job. The team still seems like they're really behind this guy, and you can get a starting running back on a very good offense way after the 6th round. So you don't have to project Ronald Jones to be some sort of 400 touch back to really be a very good value where he's going in drafts right now. So I think especially if you end up starting wide receiver heavy, you didn't just like the running backs where they were coming to you in the early rounds, maybe you went George Kittle, you need some more running back help. I think Jones is a very safe pick, because no matter what you think about the player, I'm not saying he's going to be a superstar running back or anything, but the pros right now for Ronald Jones' fantasy outlook way outweigh the cons, especially where he's going in drafts.
So Rojo has a great situation and a depressed ADP. I will say I am grateful that the Keyshawn Vaughn hype has quelled, because newsflash, he's not that great. Forget reps. He's also just not particularly good. I am a little bit worried about Bruce Arians' affinity for a veteran running back, which we saw illustrated via Chris Thompson running ahead of Dave David Johnson, until Thanksgiving, basically. I'm a little bit worried about Bruce Arians being fickle in that manner, but you make excellent points all around about not liking necessarily the player, but loving the position. I'm going to talk about a player that I think all three of us undeniably dig. It's Keenan Allen. Y'all, he's a wide receiver one. I don't know who needs to know this. He has also been wildly consistent, having gone over 1,000 yards and managing at least a wide receiver 12 fantasy finish for 3 consecutive seasons. Per PFF, he's also posted the 4th best receiving grade in the NFL since 2017. Now, I am aware that there's a change in quarterback for the Chargers. That has crossed through my news ticker. I got it. But I also feel like Keenan Allen is incredibly talented. He's a wide receiver one, an incredible route runner, a technician. And when you have Mike Williams dealing with a sprained shoulder, that doesn't bode well for the rest of this receiving core. I'm going to take the wide receiver one, and I do think that Tyrod can check down to him regularly. He's going at the top of the 6th round. That is wild value for a player this talented.
Yeah, if Tyrod's the quarterback that he was in Buffalo, like, this whole outfit is undervalued. And people are projecting like the Chargers to lose 100 pass attempts off their total from last year. I don't think so. If you can easily project him for like 540, and Keenan Allen gets a 23-24% share of that, he's going to catch 85-90 passes again. Great call.
The overreaction is crazy. Like you just said, he's not going to catch 100 balls this year. 85-90 for 1,000 plus yards and 6 touchdowns. Absolutely. That is like a wide receiver in the teens, not the 20s. So I like him. Unfortunately, we have to talk about the opposite of loving, which is not hating, but maybe fading. Let's just temper that a little bit. There's enough macabre nonsense to deal with in this world. So let's talk about 3 players that we are fading again at their ADP. Doesn't mean we don't love the player, just don't like where they're going right now. Andy, you in fact do really like the player you want to talk about.
Oh, yeah. I really enjoy watching Devin Singletary run. Like, this is a good back. He was a 5.1 yard per carry guy last year. The problems are that, we need our fantasy running backs to catch passes, and we need them to have a role at the goal line. No matter how good they are between the 20s, like, we need touchdowns, we need catches. And that's not really his thing. He was a pretty inefficient receiver last season, and they bring in Zach Moss, who was just a wonderful collegiate receiver over multiple seasons. He's a bigger back. He's 220. He kind of fits that role that you think of when you think of a guy that you just feed the ball in goal to go situations. Moss is a perfect fit for the role that they were trying to give the rotting husk of Frank Gore last year, right? Like, Gore had 18 carries inside the 10-yard line. Josh Allen had 10, and Devin Singletary had 3. Like, Devin Singletary had no role when they got near the goal line. Josh Allen, obviously a very good goal line rusher as well. Like, that's just not going to be his job. And again, not a particularly adept receiver, so we have to project something like 25 to 30 catches for Singletary. Very few touchdowns. Now, he's a good enough runner that he can score from 40 yards out, right? But we can't bank on that in fantasy. So I just don't think the touchdown total and the reception total are going to justify the draft cost.
Andy, I'm going to ask you just off the cuff here about another running back. What's your favorite hate stat for Leonard Fournette in 2019?
Yeah, that would be the fact that Leonard Fournette caught 76 balls last season, and not one of them became a touchdown. That's hard to do.
Yeah, and that is why Leonard Fournette is the player that I want to fade in the 3rd round. Are you bananas? As Andy just alluded to, his fantasy numbers were massively lifted by his work in the passing game last year, and he is not going to see 100 targets again in 2020, not with Chris Thompson reuniting with Jay Gruden, and not with Tyler Eifert, hello there, sneaking onto the Jaguars roster. That means that most of his production is going to have to come from his rushing work, but he's not good at that. Like, this is a player who managed 3.9 true yards per carry. That was RB40 last year. I understand the volume argument, and I would take him in like the 5th-ish round, top of the 6th maybe, but I am not drafting him ahead of Mark Ingram, who Andy already hyped, or even Le'Veon Bell. Matt, you are known for receivers. You have had some up and down feelings about this player, probably because his production, despite so many years in the league, remains up and down.
Yeah, look, I'm really excited about the Cowboys offense. I think Dak Prescott is, maybe not undervalued, but he's a really exciting player coming into 2020. And I think he could be the top fantasy quarterback. And I don't think anybody should be surprised because his offense is that good. But that said, I don't want to be taking their top receiver, Amari Cooper, where he's going in drafts because, look, the reality is I don't think the gap that exists between the ADP of Cooper to Michael Gallup or CeeDee Lamb is going to be as wide of a gap as their workload is. In fact, last year, Michael Gallup in the 14 games that he played had a higher percentage share of the team air yards and the team targets. And I don't think the talent gap between Cooper and Gallup is all that wide either. Gallup's a guy who had 1,100 yards and was a really consistent, steady route runner, great at the contested catch game too. And that's been a theme since he was a collegiate guy. I don't think the talent gap is that wide between these two guys, especially because, like you said, we know who Cooper is. Gallup is still an ascending player. And Cooper, you mentioned it. It's the inconsistency. People always say, well, why is Amari Cooper so inconsistent? Why is the box score so up and down? Well, it's because he's an inconsistent player. And I don't know why we should expect that to change this far into his career. There's always something going on. And look, the Cowboys have done a good job. Credit to the crazy Jason Garrett coaching staff. They've actually done a pretty good job moving him around, getting him in the slot, getting him as a flanker, moving him around pre-snap to do what he does best, because he's just not a good, consistent route runner against press man coverage. That's why he disappears against guys like Darius Slay, Marshawn Lattimore, Jalen Ramsey, because he's not this elite route runner that some of the highlight clips from the check down account or the NFL account would show you. And I think at this point in his career, he is what he is. And I just don't see a situation where they have all this talent at wide receiver where it would be smart for them to funnel 140 targets to Amari Cooper, which is kind of what you're going to need to get a payback on where he's going in fantasy right now.
So Amari Cooper went up and down and up and down. We started up, then went down, but we are going to finish on the up with 3 late round sleepers we love. Andy, I'm going to start with you. Since we talked about the Cowboys and Amari Cooper with Matt, tell me, what is a Blake Jarwin and what does he do in Dallas?
Oh yeah, give me Blake Jarwin. So if I whiff on the early round tight ends, right? I don't get Kittle, I don't get Kelsey. Maybe I take a look at Andrews or Ertz. If I don't get any of those guys, I'm not messing with the minefield that exists between like 5 and 15. I'm gonna take Blake Jarwin all day. The team paid him in the offseason. He was hugely efficient last year, about 9 yards per target. Witten is gone. Randall Cobb is gone. Those are not spectacular names, but they ate up about 160 targets last season. All of that is available both to CeeDee Lamb and to Blake Jarwin. There's a path here for Blake Jarwin to see 100 targets. There might only be 4 or 5 tight ends in any given season who see 100 targets. And if he plays 16 games, he's going to be one of those dudes. So I think there's a pretty easy path here for him to finish as a top 8, top 10 fantasy tight end.
Matt, if you don't throw a dart in the 11th round at Blake Jarwin and you want to maybe load up on receiver, who's a great value? And tell me why his team is going to surprise the rest of the NFC North in 2020.
Well, I don't know about the Bears surprising anybody in the NFC North in 2020. Don't try to sneak that one in there. But Anthony Miller, to me, really stands out among the receivers that are going in that range as a guy that is, number one, very talented and also has a very viable path to volume. And let's just start with the talent. Like, Anthony Miller, to me, he's been a reception perception superstar since he's come into the league, a guy that I think we've all kind of been waiting for him to fully break out, but there's been some injury issues. So you do have to account for that risk, but all that risk is baked into where he's going in fantasy right now, and really none of the ceiling that he possesses, because we've actually seen this guy produce towards the end of last season, just like we've seen Allen Robinson produce with Mitchell Trubisky. We've also seen Anthony Miller produce with Mitchell Trubisky as well. So if we get Nick Foles in there, we know there's a bigger ceiling for both of these guys if and when that does happen. And Miller especially, like, again, look at the rest of the Bears wide receiver depth chart. Ted Ginn, like Riley Ridley, Cordero Patterson's moved to running back, and, you've got all the ghost of Jimmy Graham at tight end. Like, the path to volume is very real for Miller. I think you can conservatively project him for 90 targets. And at that point, at that position in the draft, you're really, really getting a good payback there.
Absolutely love it. I love that you pointed out when this player is healthy, he produces from weeks 11 through 15 after getting healthy again last year. He posted 5 consecutive fantasy relevant stat lines and averaged over 86 yards per game. And that was again with Mitchell Trubisky. Foles, I think, gives this offense a little bit of a lift. And despite the consecutive off-season shoulder injuries, reports out of camper that Miller is healthy and looking good and that he crushed his rehab. So I think that's a great pick. I'm going to talk about someone that I think could break out in 2020. It's a rookie pick, and it is not Justin Jefferson or Jalen Reagor or even Michael Pittman, who I also love. It is Bryan Edwards. He is not being drafted. Say his name now because you're going to be saying a lot of it in December. On tape, what stands out the most about him is his physicality. He's 6'3", 212 pounds, an imposing presence, solid game speed, and strong hands. But when you look at him within the rest of that receiving core in Vegas, that sounds weird, the rest of the receiving core in Vegas, huh? Wow.
Gotta get used to that.
Yeah, Matt and I, we've talked about if you're looking at things from a which of these things is not like the other's perspective, Edwards stands out. I believe him to be, Matt has a different comp, but a Brandon LaFell-esque workman. Someone who can do the dirty work as the team's number 2 on the outside, allowing the star, that is Henry Ruggs, to get all of the big play glory. You've got Gruden talking about fast-tracking rookies. You've got Tyrell Williams already hurt and going to, quote, play through an injury for the rest of the season. That doesn't sound particularly great. And also Derek Carr talking about how he is very quickly gaining trust in Bryan Edwards. I think he's going to stand out. I think he's a breakout, and he is not even being drafted yet.
Now, Liz, for our trillions and trillions of listeners who just threw up at the name Brandon LaFell for your comp for your exciting young rookie here, I actually think he really he comps pretty well to Michael Crabtree in this offense too, because we just talked about your boy Amari Cooper back there and how he always was messing things up in contested situations and dropping passes in Oakland. Well, the reason that Derek Carr continued to trust Crabtree to lead the team in targets despite everybody's excitement over Cooper as a young player was he trusted Crabtree in those back shoulder situations in the contested game. And, that was why Crabtree was continually productive. And I don't think Edwards can be that guy because they really haven't had a player like that for Derek Carr since Crabtree exited the picture.
Whether it's LaFell or Crabtree, staying healthy is key to fantasy production. I've got numbers on that. We'll get back to it, but I've got numbers on it. Regardless, staying healthy is obviously key to fantasy production. And I spoke with Dr. Alex Weber, who's an orthopedic surgeon at USC, University of Southern California, to talk about some players and their 2020 outlooks from an injury POV. I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Alex Weber, Assistant Professor of Sports Medicine at the USC Department of Orthopedic Surgery and team physician for the USC Trojans, as well as the Los Angeles Kings, who are not in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But that's okay. It's not your fault, Dr. Alex. Thank you for joining us on the Yahoo Fantasy Cram session. Appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Liz.
Of course. So let's talk about some specific players. Cam Newton, obviously, has been an incredible offseason story, leaving Carolina and arriving in New England. Shoulder injuries in the past, coming off of a Liz Frank issue. He missed all but 2 games in 2019, in fact, with that Liz Frank injury. What are you expecting to see out of him from a health perspective? Again, factoring in how physical he is, how much mobility and rushing is a part of his game.
I do think that he's had a number of injuries. You highlighted 2 of the kind of high-profile injuries for him. Shoulder injury, shoulder surgery. He's come back and done very well from that. The key difference between his Liz Frank injury and I think many that are career enders is that in his case, the surgery was almost done as a precautionary measure, meaning when you injure the Liz Frank ligament in the foot, typically we see some widening in the bones that ligament connects. In his case, my understanding is that there wasn't any widening in the bones. And really, the surgery was done to make him feel comfortable, to stabilize the joint, and give him the necessary comfort he needs to do the things that he does on the field.
So, spoiler, you said in the article that we worked on together, profiling Cam, that you expect him to be, quote, 100% to start the season. Are you willing to go on record and say that again?
I am, 100%.
All right.
Yes.
Very good stuff. I love that. Let's switch gears and talk about another quarterback. This is a player who loves playing hurt. He loves telling everybody whenever he's hurt. In fact, he loves to play injured and then put on his Steelers super cape and go out there. It's Ben Roethlisberger, obviously, that I'm referring to. He missed 14 games in 2019 after tearing 3 tendons in his elbow. Ben is important because he unlocks so much scoring potential in Pittsburgh with other players like, James Conner and Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson all potentially benefiting. Where do you see Ben Roethlisberger starting and, more importantly, ending 2020?
Ben is a tough one. I think the elbow will be great. He had great surgeons take care of him. He will have some soreness, I think, residually throughout the season, but I do think his accuracy and velocity will be there in terms of throwing the ball. As we discussed in our article, my biggest concern for Ben is the gentleman is 38 years old. That's a little old for playing football. And the nature in which he plays, he's not a Cam Newton in the sense that, unfortunately, he does get hit often holding the football, but he's not making explosive plays down the field when he's doing that. He's rumbling and stumbling. And I think there's some concern there for me as the body ages and you're taking more hits, even though he's a really big guy. I worry more so about some other type of injury occurring this year, whether it's a concussion or a lower body injuries that he's sustaining while being tackled.
So you're saying you don't think his elbow is going to be re-injured, but it wouldn't surprise you if he suffers another injury and has to miss time because he's missed game time, because there is rust to shake off, and because he's at an advanced age.
Yes, 100% agree.
Jarvis Landry is another key player. He underwent an off-season hip surgery in February. He was removed from the PUP list in early August. How are you feeling about his return?
Yeah.
Obviously, the Browns are a team that are looking to rebound, so he's quite critical to that.
Yeah, no, I think for Browns fans, I'm going to say I'm very optimistic about his return. I know the surgery that he had and the surgeon he had it with. Dr. Larson's a phenomenal surgeon. I think he's already been on the record as quoted being ahead of his recovery timeline. And I think he's going to have a phenomenal season. He played as many athletes do with the type of injury he had. He played for a season where it was really limiting him or dogging him. And I think to have full range of motion of the hip with limited pain, I think he's poised to play very well all season.
AJ Green is a receiver that cannot catch a break, it seems, over the past few seasons. I mean, this is a recurrent issue, it feels like, in terms of his durability or wearing down. I'm going to let you make the diagnosis on that, but he missed obviously all of 2019 with an ankle injury that he suffered on the first day of camp.
Yeah.
Now we've heard that he suffered a hamstring issue, so a soft tissue issue in camp last Monday. He's been sidelined ever since. Zach Taylor, the head coach, says he's expected to come back onto the field, but this is a player who's 32 years old. Is he still the best jump ball specialist in the game, or are those days in the rearview mirror for him?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little more pessimistic with this one. I think there will be glimpses of the old AJ Green, but I don't think we're going to see it for a full season. I think some of the nagging injury stuff is going to catch up with him. He's certainly injury prone, getting a hamstring coming back. And then I think we talked about this a little bit in the article, but with a rookie quarterback, some inaccurate passes, putting him in compromising situations. I think there will be clips, but there won't be you won't see the full deal this year.
Yeah, don't tell Andy Behrens that Joe Burrow is going to be inaccurate at any moment. Also, fantasy tip, if AJ Green isn't it this year, T. Higgins, who is an AJ Green replicant, a rookie, is someone that you should definitely keep an eye on in those lower rounds. You might have to stash him a minute because he has to, obviously, as a rookie, gain some reps. But I do expect him to, mid-season, absolutely flash. So keep an eye on T. Higgins, especially if Green can't get on the field. Deebo Samuel, versatile player.
Yeah.
Entering his sophomore season, went to the Super Bowl as a rookie. Incredible talent. Unfortunately, fractured his foot while running routes in June. The timetable was 12 to 16 weeks, which would have had him returning in week 1 versus Arizona. But Coach Shanahan has said he's, quote, not counting on it. Foot issues, always tricky. Am I correct in assuming that they tend to be recurrent if rushed?
Yeah, I think that's where they're really trying to avoid a misstep with him. No pun intended. But the goal here is get him healthy, get the bone healed, not have any complications as he returns to full function. So I think this is just being conservative with the stud player.
If fantasy managers are looking to be proactive about the Deebo Samuel issue, Brandon Ayuk, who's a rookie with great yak ability, is someone to keep an eye on in the later rounds, or maybe even someone, if he doesn't make your bench in your draft, someone that you could elevate off the waiver wire if Samuel's foot issues don't clear up. Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley is a player who has had recurrent issues. This knee issue obviously has been one that he's struggled with since college, frankly. We don't really have a timetable on him because he's not currently injured. And he only missed one game in 2019 with a strained quad. But are you feeling he can hold up as the workhorse in Atlanta given the recurrent knee issues?
I'm going to go ahead and say absolutely not. So here's my take on Todd Gurley. He's had a lot of knee issues, ACL tear, etc. There's rumors of things like pretty advanced arthritis in parts of his knee. Todd Gurley is superhuman. The fact that he's played the way he has played given his knee situation. But I don't think the knee is going to hold up to being the workhorse running back for a full season of football.
Wow. Well,
yeah. Mic dropper there. I'm sorry, but...
No, it's good to know. I mean, right now, that potential risk is baked into his ADP, but obviously the upside with the player as talented as Gurley, superhuman, as you said, is interesting. So we'll have to move forward and see. Another running back, Sony Michel, has a foot issue. He underwent surgery for that foot in May. He's been on the PUP list all off season. Patriots running back coach Ivan Fears said Michael is no sure thing for week one. In fact, the team added Lamar Miller, who hasn't been on the field since 2018. He suffered an ACL, in fact, while he was with Houston in 2018 as insurance. I personally like Damien Harris, a second-year player, to come in and swoop the job, because even if Michel isn't healthy, he also wasn't particularly effective or efficient last year. What's your take on Michel?
Yeah, so I tried to do a little research into this. I don't have as much information personally about the most recent surgery. However, they've been very vague about releasing any details, saying that it wasn't injury related, that it was more maintenance or cleanup, so to speak. However, the timeline of his return leads me to believe that's not the case, in the sense that there is something seriously troubling with this foot injury, because he hasn't been on a 6 to 8 week timeline. He's been on a 10 to 12 week timeline, which is now being pushed a little bit further. So something is not well there. He's also a player who's had many knee injuries in the past. And when you start seeing foot, knee injuries in the same running back athlete, you start to worry about, is this breaking down? Are the mechanics of his gait and how he runs breaking down? And the knees are now leading to adjacent joint problems in the foot and ankle. So I would be a little bit cautious around him this year.
Patriots organization usually tight-lipped, particularly about injuries. So all of that lines up. Also, like I said, Damien Harris in the 14th round, go grab him, stash him. He's going to be the breakout this year. Thank you so much, Dr. Weber, for joining us. Go ahead and follow Dr. Weber on social. Where can they follow you on Twitter and Instagram, Doctor?
Dr. Alex Weber on Twitter and Alex Weber MD at Instagram.
Matt, Andy, what the doc said about Sony Michel, I am leaning very much into the Damien Harris hype. Can I take your temperatures on that? Andy, you first.
Well, first of all, like, you don't have to actually invest in the New England backfield if you don't want to, right? Like, you're not under any obligation to throw draft picks at Patriots running backs. It can be a mess. It can be a minefield. I get that. Harris is the one guy that I have drafted, and I've drafted him repeatedly. It was easier to get him, 2 weeks ago than it is perhaps today. He's a pretty good player. He's not a wow player necessarily, but he was good enough to keep Josh Jacobs off the field a little bit at Alabama. Like, Nick Saban seemed to think pretty highly of him. I think he can be a force in this offense, and obviously with Cam Newton, the presumptive starting quarterback for that team, that's pretty friendly for the running back position in New England as well.
Matt, can you not give such a lukewarm take and really get us excited about Damien Harris and his 2020 sophomore effort breakthrough here?
Oh, hell yeah. Look, I mean, Liz, I know we were really excited about Damien Harris last year. That didn't work out. So let's stay in the present here. And, you know, the reason, Andy, that we've got to throw dart throws at the Patriots backfield, and I realize things have obviously changed now that Tom Brady's not there. It's because it's one of the most productive backfields for fantasy. And Damien Harris, to me, he always struck me as like a Pierre Thomas type of player. And, you know, maybe that's like the Brandon LaFell of wide receivers. I don't necessarily think so. But Pierre Thomas was always like, you know, he was a solid pass catcher, solid in the run game, really a do-it-all guy that was very hard to take off the field. And I think Damien Harris could be that type of player. And here's the deal, folks. Like Rich Rebar from Sharp Football said it best to me. I saw him tweet this today. Like, whatever Damien Harris gives you, he could give you a straight up 0. I promise it's going to be better than whatever Sony Michel gives you. And I think that's a great way to put it.
Absolutely. He has a multiple skill set. He may be more dependable than extra in terms of his playing style, but it's pretty close to the Patriot way. Patriots, huge on strategy. Fantasy requires managers who want to succeed be big on strategy as well. So, Matt, give me one nugget for fantasy managers strategy-wise to use entering this crazy season.
Yeah, to me, I think teams are going to be so sort of thrown off from a game script perspective. I think things are going to be weird. Like defenses might have the edge early on. And I think that you really need to just favor these guys in the backfield that have proven receiving roles. And to me, this is really an Austin Ekeler tweet, because at no point in this show have I really gotten to talk about how excited I am about Austin Ekeler and how all these goofballs out there are letting him fall outside of the top 10 backs. Give me a break. Like Liz talked about earlier, we realize that the Chargers offense has changed with this quarterback. And I know that people immediately will say scrambling quarterback equals less targets for a running back. And theoretically that has been true, but Ekeler is a different kind of machine to me. He saw 28% of his targets out of the slot last year. He's not just some bunny hop little like dump it off to him. He's a true, I mean, this guy, you know, I'm a name drop here. I'm a name drop the guy. In the before times when we were working out in the gym together, me and Austin Ekeler, he was complaining to me about that I don't chart him for reception perception because that's how many routes he runs. I mean, this is not just a dump it off back. So I think he's going to be an integral part of this offense. And like, to me, these are the type of players you need to target, because remember when we all used to say like, Christian McCaffrey, he can't be a 3-down back. Well, at the end of 2020, we're going to be talking about how dumb it was that people thought that Austin Ekeler couldn't be a 3-down back. So my strategy for you really is just draft Austin Ekeler and log out.
Sample size much bigger for Austin Ekeler than guys like Miles Sanders or Kenyon Drake, who seem to be gaining on him in terms of
even
ADP.
Josh Jacobs too, another guy that I'd rather take Ekeler ahead of.
And you calm down about that. Well, we can talk about that offline. Andy, what else should fantasy managers stop caring about?
Yeah, first of all, if you're playing the Matt Harmon name drop drinking game, you want to go ahead and drink right now. We have that just occurred.
Hey, you're pretty sober this long into the program. Give me a break.
One piece of fantasy advice that I feel like I've given for years, and it's never been more applicable or more important than it is right now, is that like you just can't make plans in the NFL, like long-term plans as a fantasy manager. Don't talk to me about bye weeks. I wish we didn't even show a player's bye week in the draft tool, right? Because you just can't make plans 8 weeks, 10 weeks in advance. Let me tell you something about my baseball leagues, my fantasy baseball leagues, that I think is probably going to be applicable to fantasy football this season. Like, it took about a week and a half for me to fill all of my IL spots. Like, and we added a bunch in Yahoo leagues too. This year is going to be really hard. Between, you know, a bunch of teams getting wrecked by COVID, obviously, and the normal injuries that we expect in an NFL season. Like, there's going to be a lot of missed games, and we're going to hear about them late. And the idea that you can make plans like 2 months in advance, I'll draft this, you know, I'll pass on this high upside guy because it doesn't work in terms of bye weeks when we hit November. That's absolutely ridiculous. That is a ludicrous thing to do. Don't think about it at all. When you're drafting beyond, say, the 5th round, I don't even plan on a lot of those guys being on my team at the end of the year. I just want to take a bunch of big swings on high upside players with exceptional potential, and I'll sort out, you know, week 6, week 7, week 8 when we get there.
the landscape is ever changing. And while we've talked about Tyler Eifert and Blake Jarwin on this show, we haven't really talked about the tight end landscape and how overall and how it has shifted rather dramatically from 2019 to 2020. I mean, at the top of 2019, I likened it to the aftermath of a Thanos finger snap. And now, because of the infusion of young talent, that chasm between the very elite, I'm talking Kelsey and Kittle, and I, like Matt, have Kittle ranked ahead of Kelsey, just by a hair, but, for what it's worth. And then the, quote, late round the late round dart throws, the potential breakout players trying to find this year's Mark Andrews. There are some players in the middle. I wrote the tight end positional primer / preview for the website for Yahoo Fantasy. And, I did a poll and I kept hearing people say, like, I don't touch tight end. I don't touch it. No, I just late round and double digit rounds. That's when I did. And I thought, well, has anyone ever done a mock, like actually done a mock employing a strategy where they took Kittle in the second or they took, Hunter Henry in the 5th or 6th, and then they took Mike Gesicki, say, in the double-digit rounds. Has anyone done that and seen what they ended up with? And so I did that, and that's all in the primer. Here's what I can tell you. If you are drafting out of the 3 or 4 spot, you can absolutely feel comfortable selecting either Kittle or Kelsey. I don't care your preference. If you want the Super Bowl champ, great. If you want the $73 million man, great. Pick either of those guys as it snakes back towards the end of the second. Your team's still going to be money. There's enough depth at the wide receiver position that you can continue to hit running back and an elite tight end and still be fine. If you miss out on those guys or whiff on them, as Andy says, then I did not like the way my teams looked when I reached for even a Zach Ertz, frankly. When I tried to get Mark Andrews again in 2020, the double-digit guys, when you start to hit those guys in the double-digit rounds, things do start to pop. I will say, for what it's worth, I am continually selecting Hayden Hurst in the 9th or 10th. I really like his situation, and he is a prime late-round target at the position for me. So that was a little bit of a prediction, because I do think that he is going to work out well, Hayden Hurst, in Atlanta. But we have more predictions, and I'm going to kick this one off. Then we'll go to Andy and then Matt. Mine is that Cam Newton, we're going to talk about another Patriot. Cam Newton is a top 12 fantasy producer at the position. I am not scared about it. We talked about it with Alex Weber earlier. He may be entering his age 31 season, but Dr. Weber thinks he is going to be 100%. He's on a 1-year bare minimum deal. This is the only advantage that Bill Belichick has not had offensively for the past 15 years is a mobile quarterback, and now he finally gets one. So if he is going to be healthy, tell me on a 1-year bare minimum deal that Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels are not going to scheme like hell for him. He is being drafted in the 13th and 14th rounds because people are unnecessarily scared. He's my QB 11. Don't wait for it. There's my big prediction. Andy, give me yours.
I actually love that call. Cam Newton, by the way, like one of the best goal line runners of his generation, almost. And he's part of the reason that I get a little bit skittish about the New England backfield. Like, I feel like Cam takes a ton of those inside the 5 carries. Absolutely love that call. I'm going to stick with quarterbacks, and I'm going to say that Joe Burrow finishes as a rookie as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. He's obviously, I don't need to teach people about Joe Burrow. He's coming off perhaps the greatest collegiate season in history. He had a passer rating of 202, which is considered quite good. 60 touchdowns. That's pretty good. So he's a great collegiate player. We know that. It is very rare that a number 1 overall pick at quarterback comes into a situation that is as ripe as the one that we see in Cincinnati. And some of that is just that AJ Green was out the entire year, right? So he's got this dominant, size receiver in AJ Green. He's got Tyler Boyd in the slot, a wonderful play who's going to deliver value at his draft position. Got a bunch of weapons. Got Mixon, got Bernard. It's a great situation. They're going to be playing from behind a lot. I just love it. If we'd had a normal offseason, I would be pretty confident in predicting that Joe Burrow would break Andrew Luck's rookie passing yardage record. It's about 4,300 yards. I think he can go over 4,000 yards. I think he can challenge 28, 30 passing scores. And then the other thing about Burrow, he runs the ball really well. Like we maybe don't give him enough credit for that. He ran for 12 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons at LSU, over 300 rushing yards in each of those seasons. So there's a little bit of a rushing safety net here as well.
Matt, take it home.
Terry McLaurin, your consensus wide receiver 24 in ADP, going in the 5th, 6th round, is going to be a top 13 fantasy receiver this year. This guy is... Look, I could sit here and read you off a bunch of perception nuggets, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to waste everybody's time with that. You can find him on Twitter if you'd really like to do it. But here's the deal. Like, this guy, I think, is the next superstar at the wide receiver position. Like, I'm excited about all of these 2019 rookie receivers. So, like I said, Marquise Brown, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, all of these guys. But at the top of the list to me, the best player from this class is easily going to be Terry McLaurin. I think he could be... Legitimately, when you watch him play from a contested catch perspective, from a separation perspective, he's not too dissimilar to Odell Beckham. Like, I think he's that type of talent. And everybody's going to be yapping about, well, Dwayne Haskins. What about Dwayne Haskins? In the final 3 weeks of last season, Haskins went 67% completion percentage, 5-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, 8.8 yards per adjusted yards per attempt. He was legit, like, good, or at least passable. And that's all you really need. For McLaurin to break out, you just need Haskins to be passable. I think he can be passable when you consider just what a mess he was thrown into last year, and it was very unfairly judged from just a lot of stupid stuff last year. People just being too hard on the guy, honestly. And look, I think when you look at this situation in Washington, Scott Turner last year, 64% pass rate in neutral game scripts last year. They leaned towards the pass even when they weren't losing. And so if you give Terry McLaurin a 23% share, which I think is being conservative given the state of Washington's pass catcher crew right now, 23% share of those targets, it's very, very easy to get him to 80 catches, 1,100 yards. And then you're just talking about a guy that I think could be a superstar scoring 7 to 10 touchdowns, way out kicking where he's going in average draft position right now.
You guys, we're ending on such a positive note. I mean, think about this. In 2020, we are predicting 2 superstars, 1 receiver, 1 quarterback, and an incredible rebound story for 1 Cam Newton. I am starting to feel the silver linings surrounding me. More importantly, we did it. We made you all better fantasy players in 1 hour. It was that easy. Whew, anything else,
without
fellas?
a hitch, honestly.
Yeah, smooth as can be. Smooth as peanut butter, I guess you could say. Andy, anything else? Matt, anything else?
Well, I feel like we've already mentioned Brandon LaFell twice, and I just want to make sure that we got his name out there again.
Yeah, keep an eye on that guy. Deep sleeper. Honestly, people just go play fantasy football this year, because you know what? Here's the deal. Like, if you stink this year, if your league mates just, rip you apart, blow you out, this is the easiest asterisk year of all time. Be like, listen, that was the COVID year, man. 2020 for our league, that doesn't even count. Like, you can be talking so much junk next year, despite the fact that your team was terrible this year. This is a great year to play fantasy. Come on.
This is another solid looking towards the bright side point. If you take Matt's advice, if you haven't already, get some friends together or play with strangers. Hell, bridge some gaps. We need some of that. Whatever floats your boat, sign up for some fantasy leagues over at Yahoo Fantasy. We got season long. We've got best ball. We've got daily fantasy. All of the fantasy football games right at your fingertips. And if that wasn't enough and you need fantasy advice every day, let me tell you, you are in luck. Matt, Andy, and I, along with our very own Scott Pianowski and Dalton Del Don, co-host the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast that drops every weekday on all of your podcast apps, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your pods. The Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast is there. I am at LizLoza_FF. That is at Andy Behrens and at Matt Harmon _BYB. Get your draft on, kids, because we are out.